I want to start today with just a simple statement. Silent questions and doubts rarely find answers. I'll say that again. Silent questions and doubts rarely find answers. Now I wonder, have you ever found yourself sitting in a classroom or a meeting and you're burning to ask a question or raise an issue? Maybe you fundamentally don't understand something or miss the crucial point, but you're not brave enough to ask. Or you worry about looking stupid and then the moment's gone. The conversation moves on and you are left in the dark and less able to do whatever comes next. It's a horrible feeling, not fully understanding the situation. It can make you feel quite panicky, and it certainly doesn't help you produce your best work, and is more likely to lead to failure than success. So asking the right questions then, seeking clarity on something you don't understand or that you have doubts about, these are good qualities, and Thomas certainly had them. He had proved himself a bold questioner at the Last Supper, when Jesus was talking about his Father's house with many rooms and how he would be going there to prepare a place for them. Thomas didn't understand and was brave enough to ask the obvious question of how would they know the way? And in doing so, it set up one of Jesus' most famous I am statements. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Thomas asked the question that no one else wanted to ask, and we have benefited from the answer ever since. Greater clarity then came from asking the question and staying silent. But what about doubts? Now, Thomas has been labelled as a doubter because he asked for proof. But for me, his doubt is linked to his questioning nature and his need to understand. Thomas didn't understand what was happening. He'd seen his leader, his mentor, his friend die on the cross. And now there was talk of him being alive, risen from the dead, walking and talking. The other disciples had seen him, but he had not. He had missed it. And I can only begin to imagine the range of human emotions he must have gone through, from disappointment and resentment to doubt and confusion. What he wanted, what he needed, was proof. Not the testimony of others, as good and reliable as it was, but tangible proof that was personal to him, that he could rely on and fall back on when times got tough. It sort of reminded me, actually, of the way I used to feel in French listening tests at school. I would sit in the language lab with my headphones on, not really understanding what was being said, but having to answer the questions. Those tests always made me feel really quite alone, confused, and pretty despondent that I was actually going to pass. I couldn't rely on my friends for help. And in fact, it made me feel worse seeing them writing answers when I was struggling. Only my understanding of the French words would help me pass the test. I was the one who had to take the time to learn them. Thomas's fellow disciples might have told him what had happened to them when Jesus appeared the first time, but this didn't help Thomas. And I do want you to remember that Thomas was living in a unique moment in history. Jesus had died and had risen, but the Holy Spirit had not yet come. He didn't have the complete Bible as we do now, and the reassurances that it's God's living word written by men but inspired by the Holy Spirit. He doesn't have the benefit of hindsight because he is in the moment. And it is his testimony that will form part of the scriptures. It is his questions and doubts that have helped generations to come to understand the events in a clearer way than him right then. Right then, he needed something personal to him. He needed to understand what had happened to Jesus. And although he put it rather bluntly, he was essentially asking Jesus the question, did you actually die and rise again? And it is wonderful to see Jesus' response, which was full of patience and understanding. The second time that he appears to the disciples in the upper room, he echoes the exact words of Thomas's blunt request by offering him his hands and his side to be touched and examined. Thomas had once again asked the question that everyone wanted an answer to, but nobody wanted to ask. He is the reason that every one of those disciples could leave the upper room with absolute certainty that Jesus had died and been resurrected. He is the reason that we have written testimony giving evidence of Jesus' physical resurrection. And Thomas's immediate and unequivocal response to call Jesus my Lord and my God is the statement of truth that sums up what the Gospel of John is aiming to show, that Jesus is, in fact, the Son of God. So what do we learn from Thomas? And there are loads of things I could say, but I want to focus on two. Firstly, we should not be embarrassed or ashamed if we do not always understand or have doubts and questions. Staying silent will not get you the answers that you crave. Thomas was bold enough to ask the direct questions, and I want to encourage you to be like him, to turn your doubts into questions, turn your questions into prayers, and then turn those prayers to Jesus. And secondly, Thomas shows us the importance of having a personal relationship with Jesus. He could have accepted the testimony of his fellow disciples that Jesus had risen from the dead. But would that have been enough to face persecution and hardship for? To drive him to India preaching the gospel to all he met, and to eventually be martyred for? He had the conviction to do those things because he had known Jesus when he was alive, but then also experienced his grace and love after his death and resurrection. Thomas was not prepared to be the only one to fail the French listening test. He pushed for his own understanding and experience, and would go on to receive the Holy Spirit at Pentecost and do amazing things for Jesus. We must do the same. Our faith is also personal. Through the cross, we are in direct relationship with Jesus, and when empowered by the Holy Spirit, when we ask questions, we can and should expect answers. Do not be the one to leave the meeting not knowing what to do. Get on your knees and pray. Read his word. Talk to fellow believers and look for evidence of his majesty in creation, and then listen for his answers. And when they come, it will be those moments that give you the conviction, like Thomas, to go out and do amazing things for Jesus.